Hi, hello. Sorry. Hi, Nina. It's great to have you here for the AEMS Alternative Economic and Monetary System Summer School in a digital format. Okay, here's Nina Treu from Konzeptwerk Neue Ökonomie, the co-founder, who has been working on degrowth for the past 10 years and helped organize the 2012 Leipzig conference on degrowth. And I'm Haliki Kreinin from the AIM Summer School. Okay, welcome, Nina.
Hi.
All right, so can you tell us a little bit about what degrowth is, actually, just to start us off?
Yeah. So degrowth is a concept where we rethink the economy and therefore also rethink society. Degrowth is the way to look at the world in a different way. It's not just by saying, okay, we want to degrow something, but it's to say we need to degrowth in order to achieve social justice and to stay within our ecological limits and to achieve a democratic way of the economy and society. But for that, we also need to rethink the way the economy works. And we need to get from a profit-driven system based on concurrence to a needs-based system based on collaboration. And I think the most important angle or approach of degrowth is to say that right now our material and energy throughput and output is way too high. And we need to downscale that by a whole range and to rethink differently how we work. But that's not the end. The end is to achieve a more just and a more ecological world.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just playing devil's advocate here. There are a lot of mainstream economists and also welfare economists and development economists who are very scared of degrowth and specifically compare degrowth to a recession. And what would you tell someone when they ask how degrowth is different from an economic recession?
Yeah. So I think what you could say is that it's the difference between degrowth by design or degrowth by disaster. What we want is to say, okay, we need to acknowledge the fact that our economy and the way we exploit our planet has totally gone outside the boundaries. And we need to degrow that in order to achieve a good life for all. But that doesn't mean we stay within our capitalist system where we accumulate all the time. And then suddenly that breaks down. And with that, all the system of distribution and production breaks down and people get unemployed and the distribution system doesn't work anymore. So we lack basic goods. And then maybe we have some ecological downscaling as well, but we don't even know. That is a recession. That is what probably Corona will bring us and is already bringing in a lot of places around the world. But that is not degrowth. Because the question is, first of all, why we do it, and then where do we get from there? So if now we said, okay, let's take this crisis, the pandemic and the economic crisis that will follow, as a way to think about the social ecological transformation that we want and think, how do we want to restructure our society? So how can we create an economy that serves the many, not the few, that is sustainable, more regional, that employs people in a way they want to contribute to work, then we could get to degrowth. But it's not that just the way the economy shrinks is degrowth. Maybe some of you have seen this little elephant design. It's really funny because there's like a comparison where you think, okay, maybe many people think that degrowth is just the economy breaking down. And I understand that people think that in the first place when you talk about degrowth, but then the idea of degrowth is the elephant turning into a snail and moving completely differently. And that's what degrowth wants. And that's what degrowth wants, yeah. And I share some of the criticism towards the word degrowth. Kaliki and I recently discussed that on a panel on the degrowth conference in Vienna. But I think there's always advantages and disadvantages to terms. And I think what degrowth does well, it says it hits on the right spot. It sets the way we are now working and living exceeds the capacities of humans and the other parts of the world. And so we need to think it differently. And yeah, maybe we put a little emphasis in the word on how we think it differently, but by that we say we have to change the way it is.
Why do you think it's so hard for most of us to think about a system where there's no economic growth, especially for economists?
That's a tough question because I think there's so many reasons for it. So in the German context, we often talk about the mental infrastructures that we have. And we associate our well-being and our welfare to the term growth. So everything has to grow in order to be good. We also have to think we have to get further, be able to do more, also do more, learn more, etc. So there's a whole paradigm behind that which is attached to growth. And then in the normal context, so in our daily lives, we don't separate at all what is economic growth, so a rising of the domestic general product, or what general domestic product, sorry, other way around, and what is growth in the sense of like a human being growing or a plant growing or knowledge growing. And so people think that's the same way, but it's totally ridiculous to think that way, right? If the GDP grows, this means we have produced more goods and services, and we have produced them for more money, right? It's a monetary term that grows, and that does not mean at all that we have grown in anything which is meaningful. There's this whole debate around the GDP and what factors in, which is, by the way, different in many different countries. And to make it one common denominator, we needed to create an equal term. So some countries, for example, took in care work in the beginning and said, well, care work, that is totally part of the economy. And others said, no, we can't take that in. That's not a production sector. So there's a lot of debates on what is in the GDP. And the thing it has become so powerful is because it's a very easy number and all the countries can calculate it, but it doesn't reflect if we have created prosperity. And for example, that's a very well-known example, is that if we have a lot of car crashes and a lot of people who have to go to hospital and a lot of cars that have to be rebuilt, that is good for the GDP. The GDP grows, but it's not good for the people. We have problems, and it's not good for the environment because we have to create more cars and there's a lot of danger and all that. So there's a lot of things in there that don't help our prosperity. And so one of the things that we don't separate the thinking. Then we live in a world of neoliberalism since the 1980s. We have a paradigm of China. There is no alternative. So people think the only way our economy works is the way it works now, especially since the failure, if we can say it like that, but the breakdown of the Iron Curtain and the end of the Soviet Union in the 1990s, right? And the thinking of the end of history and capitalism won, we think that's the only way we can think an economy. So that's also, then you refer to the economists. That's also, we have a system, an education system where in the economic sector, you only learn about a certain models. We learn very few about economic history. I mean, probably all of you know that better than me. So we are in this thinking and in that learning in the broader sector. And then maybe putting that in a very big and historic context is that also the way the world works is by a system of extractivism and domination. And you can date back that to the beginning of human settlement, but especially with colonizations for the past 500 years, and then industrial production for the last 150 or 200 years, we have extracted a lot of other parts. And so we have always taken more than we would need for a certain community. And to overcome this thinking means we have to overcome thinking of progress for the last hundreds of years. And that is obviously not an easy task.
Mm-hmm. No, actually, it's interesting you mentioned the breakdown of the Soviet Union, because that is actually another kind of criticism I've received, at least, that if you criticize the capitalist system, then you're a communist, or that degrowth is communism, which obviously it is also not. And what would you say to people that say that?
Yeah. So in Germany, especially in Eastern Germany, you are confronted with that right away, right? If you're against capitalism, you must be for socialism or communism. Already that is a really weird thinking, as if humans or the whole planet could only come up with two systems. It's also a very anthropocentric and a very Western-based point of view, because there's so many other systems of creating a society around the world, and that's not only socialism and capitalism. And then I think the essential point in the differentiation to socialism is, first of all, obviously, what is the real existing socialism and what is the dream of socialism or communism, and that is different. And the other part is like, what do we do with the means of production and how is democracy organized? And degrowth says we cannot simply take over the means of production and continue with them in the same way, meaning producing a lot, just a little differently governed, but we need to totally undo the system of production. I mean, socialism was also a growing system. And in some parts of the world, it was even worse in the terms of ecological downturns than capitalism. So we need to have a system that is not based on extractivism and domination, but on a real democracy and on a sustainable way of production. And a central point there is also who organizes the production in the real existing socialist states. It was a hierarchical system, it was centralized, and it was, again, not decentralized, it was not involving all the people. And often if you discuss capitalism...
All men as well, right? Just
again?
It was also just men in charge, basically, mostly, right? Yeah.
It's a hard question because, feminists feminists, for example, in Eastern and Western Germany are totally different. And I think women were a much broader share of the workforce in the Eastern part than in the Western part. So, but then that's the question, who runs the decisions, right? And how you come in there. But I think you cannot generalize it that much. But anyways, if you want to imply all the people, I think you need to create structures that are based on the place you work at, and then have a decentralized coordination. And that is totally different thinking apart from the growth question concerning socialism and capitalism.
Very good. I was just thinking about the example of Estonia, where there were definitely some token women, but obviously also a different Soviet system, but where women's actual involvement in decision making was very minimal, I think. Okay. So we have now established that degrowth is the alternative economic and monetary system. We need other monetary system. I think degrowth maybe needs to work on that still. I'm not sure. But what are the strategies to arrive there? How do we get to this degrowth utopia? We know that economic growth is such an imperative that is in our minds. We know that it's difficult to even critique economic growth as a goal, even when we know the environmental impact. What are the strategies for degrowth? Maybe you can talk a little bit about also your work at Konzeptwerk Neue Ökonomie in relation to this.
Yeah. So first of all, and I think in a broader term of political understanding, I think there is no one master plan where you get to the society or the economy you want to. Yeah, isn't that weird? No. And we're all taking all our time to find it. So I think that's really important, like that we have a pluralistic approach, because there is no one-fits-all solutions already in our societies, but above all, not concerning the planet or anything. And I think we have to see what kind of strategies fit for what. So in parallel to this slot at the conference itself, for example, there is a slot for the economy of the common good. And the economy for the common good is a very practical approach for companies, saying how can you start transforming the society and the economy. And obviously it wants to go a lot further as well, but it refers foremost to that. And then you can ask, okay, what are the main actors of change in a degrowth perspective? And I would say that totally depends on which degrowth perspective you work on or you reflect. So in Germany, for example, the post-growth, so the post-Wachstums perspective is very strong in degrowth. And from my point of view, that is focusing way too much on a personal level of sufficiency. So how can we reduce our personal ecological footprint and free ourselves from the load of growth and from the load of stuff that we have and the load of services that we spend our time with. And from my point of view, that is way too limited on individual choices, because this is very important, right? You need to ask yourself, where do I want to stand in life? And it's very helpful and very empowering also to find ways how you can change your life. But you can only get that far. So if I say now, I want to take public transport everywhere, but then I need to go to places where there is no public transport, well, I'm kind of limited, right? And I can still take my bike, but that is limited to people who are able-bodied and can do this. So we can only get that far. So we need strategies also on a bigger level. And then there's players who say, well, we need to focus totally on change from the bottom. So let's say we try to create networks of different ways of the economy. So we have community-based agriculture here, and we have housing projects there, and we have hacker spaces here. It's all places where we can already try to interact in a different way and create a new economy. And I think that is very important in order to get examples on how the economy could work. But also that I think that can only get you so far, because in the end is what's the kind of state that is above it, right? What's the governance system? What are the regulations and rules that you need to comply with in order to be able to work the economy on that level? And then there's people who say, well, we need to do this by a state-based rules, right? So, for example, let's have a social ecological tax reform, a working hours reduction, a redistribution of care, prevention reforms, digital legislation, etc. And I would also say, well, that is also very important and we should do this, but there is no way that this change can come from above. So if you don't have people who have rethought their way of being, and we don't have projects that people are already involved and that do things on the ground, there's no way that you put it from above and then it works. Maybe that's also referring to our question about socialism. That is one of the problems, right? It's hard to have one centralized solution for everything. So I think we have to come together with different solutions, and especially since we are kind of running out of time due to climate change. So if we want to avoid dangerous climate change, we need to curb our emissions so badly in the coming years that we cannot focus on one solution and say, well, this is going to be the solution and we just work for that. So, for example, if the state decided that and that, or we transformed the state in that and that way, then we would finally have the solution we need, because I think we need to start doing what we can do. And if those forces then come together, they can maybe create the transformation we need.
I would just have one question about that. Maybe also being devil's advocate. People have also argued that the Gilets jaunes in France, for example, the protest against carbon taxes, which were really a protest against a specific form of carbon taxes, are also a sign that the large majority of a population would not accept degrowth policies. And people like, I think one of the professors at the EU has also accused degrowthers of being oppressive, for example, or that wanting to make their demands in an oppressive way, much like the communist regime, believing in these utopian ideas and thinking that these ideas should be implemented and pushed on people. So how do you overcome that? Or large topic.
So I think it's very hard to change the way our society works like that, right? And I think what you could see with the Gilets jaunes is that you have a left behind countryside in France. You have had very authoritarian politics and very strong anti-social politics for the last couple of years. And so if you now take you put more burdens on people, even if you frame it somehow ecologically, that people won't take that, right? And people also knew that this was just a way to get the tax reform passed and not by rethinking the way in a social ecological change. So I think if you combine strong ecological taxes with strong taxes on the rich, and those ecological taxes also don't burden too much on that part of society who already has struggles to make ends meet, I think those would totally work. You just have to combine it with social policies, right? So that was already thought too short, I think. And in terms of is degrowth oppressive or not, I think you can argue that very easily from a liberal point of view and as a privileged person. I would say that the current system is very oppressive to many, many people. And they cannot have that. Many people don't have all the choices they would like to have. And so they feel very governed. And so if people now say, oh my God, you want to limit how many flights I can take, it's like, well, this choice is not that up to that many in life, right? And if that helps to save lives all over the world, then we should certainly think about that. And I think that's also something you can now in Western societies and also in white discourses, let's say, see with the conflict between Fridays for Future and older generations who say, well, if we want to have a future, we have to do exactly that. And it's kind of sad that it has to boil down to that, because there's so many social movements all the time who push for social changes, right? And who are also more diverse than, let's say, in majority white groups. But maybe it has to come to that, right? That people who are in different positions and who also might have a privileged perspective afterwards say, well, what you offer us as a privileged perspective doesn't work at all anymore. And it's kind of funny that I kind of didn't say that earlier, right? And I said more perspectives have to come together. Always, obviously, like a perspective of social movements who come together and who combine the individual change and the projects on the ground and the advocacy for different politics on the state level. They have to push for that.
Exactly. And I just wanted to add that I think the current system, or the capitalism itself, it functions so well just because it gives everyone the illusion that they could be the group that can fly a lot all the time, right? So when that is taken away, maybe you feel like even if you are not benefiting from the system, it feels like something is being taken away, maybe, even if you would benefit from a completely different system, like in the US with healthcare.
But I think that is also a question of power distribution, right? So I think there's a lot of people in the world who know that they won't be part of the upper class or the high middle class worldwide, but they just not in the power centers. So if people, I know, they struggle in Bolivia or Colombia against lithium or stone coal is not the official word, mining, and they get shot for this, they do a lot to struggle against that. And they don't think, oh, I'm going to benefit from that. It's just the power centers where those decisions are taken are so far away. Or, for example, in Greece, there were so many protests. I mean, the whole society was uprooted 5 years ago against the Troika, but the decisions weren't taken there, right? So I think it's also capitalism, obviously, the production moves to other places so that the democratic decision-making and the production are separated. And that's also where it gets its power from. Yeah.
Okay. And so what are the, now we got into a very difficult topic for, so what can we do if things are, what can people do that want to make things better or fight for degrowth?
Yeah, well, I mean, I mentioned already parts of that earlier in the sense of you can find different ways to do it. And I think it's always good to find ways that inspire you. That sounds kind of weird, but don't look for a solution that you find kind of boring, where you feel like, okay, that's theoretically a very good solution, but you're not inspired by it. You don't burn for it. So I think there's so many ways out there you can fight for a better world. And it's the most important thing is that you believe in it, and that you find others who believe in it, and you have the impression you make a change. And maybe that's by lobbying for a different education at your university, as many people do in different networks, or maybe that's by finding a community garden, or maybe that's by joining a party that strives for social ecological change. Maybe that's by writing books, or it's by supporting other groups who represent less privileged groups, or it's by signing petitions online all the time. So I think there's many ways to do that. And that sounds a little weird, because maybe you would expect me to say, oh, you do those 3 steps. But I think it depends on the position you are in and what you can give. And I think it's also important to think that the solution you might now find, or the way you now believe in, maybe in 2 years you realize, okay, this didn't make a change, or I don't like it anymore, or this other thing came up and it's so important. And that's also part of political struggle, right? That you change the way you move forward. And maybe I can link that to a question you asked earlier, but I didn't really answer, which is the thing we do at ConceptDeck. So behind me, you see a very nice poster for Congress we do in the end of August, and I invite you all to join. It's going to be digitally, so you can join from anywhere. And it's called Future for All. And so we called it that way because at ConceptDeck, we have been working on the term degrowth for a couple of years. And we were often confronted with the criticism I already told you earlier, right? It's a negative term. It doesn't show where we want to go. It's so economy-based. There's so many white people and so many academics believing in it. And we're like, yeah, it's true. I mean, the most important point is to find a different way our economy works, right? And our democracy and our society works, and not the term. So we created something broader where people can collaborate or jump in more easily, which is called Future for All. And we try to find different answers in different sectors. So what we did is we did future workshops in different sectors like mobility or education or living, and tried to combine those elements in a vision on how we could live in 2048 in a country that is maybe like a European country, but it could also be somewhere else if others feel inspired by that. And that is also part of the learning process, right? So I still believe that degrowth is a very good approach in order to identify the problems of the economy, but it's maybe not the best approach to get a lot of people in to find ways for a new economy. And I think that's also a part of it, right? There's analysis and critique, but there's also the utopia and where do we want to go? And degrowth has different parts. And it's also maybe, where's your personality? Are you rather like, I still want to learn and understand the system? Or you're like, oh no, I want to get inspired and I have to find utopias. And both is fine, right? Both can be ways to create our new system.
Nice. That's it's a very positive statement. I have a kind of slightly critical question now. Do you think the European Green Deal is a strategy for degrowth?
I don't know. So I think reforms on a state level or a supranational level as in Europe can be a way forward for degrowth if they're like revolutionary reforms or radical reform. So what I said earlier, for example, if you have a real social ecological tax reform where you really tax the rich and ecological use in a just way, that would be a way forward in a new society. If that's what you do and that's it, and you stabilize capitalism with it, I don't think it's really degrowth. Mm-hmm. And for example, if you say, okay, we want to reduce our dependency of wage labor, that's why we have a working time reduction and we see how we redistribute work, and then we take it from there, that can be degrowth. Mm-hmm. But if it stabilizes us where we are, then it's not degrowth. Mm-hmm. And the important thing about that in the Green New Deal debates, wherever it is that I think what is the intention behind it? Where do we want to go? And it's something about reforming the capitalist way, making our brown, dirty, like profit-driven capitalism a little greener and sounding a little more sustainable. So it's some kind of greenwashing. Then I would say it's not degrowth. Mm-hmm. But if it's a practical way to rethink our economy and people want more than the reforms they propose, it can be degrowth. And it's really tricky in here. So I would say I read something and I'm not completely sure where they want to go, because also people, maybe they propose something and strategically they want to get further, but they don't say everything they want, right? So we have to be very accurate with that and very skeptical and check it out, but also maybe be inspired and say, hey, cool, we can take forward from here. I don't know.
No, I think that's a very good reply, because I'm also not sure where I stand. Yeah, European Green Deal definitely, like, it's not degrowth, but maybe, yeah, let's see what happens with it. Is there anything else you would like to add to our discussion?
Thanks for listening. If you've listened for half an hour, and I look forward to discussing the questions with you. And thanks a lot for doing this interview.
Nice. Then I think we can wrap up here, and I guess you will be there to discuss with us a bit more.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks very much, Nina. See you there.